again, thanks for bearing with us and join us today for a Dive for Ag professional development session for educators, middle and high school educators. Thank you to those of you who keep coming back and learning more about the great work that the people in this team is doing. Today is an exciting day. But since we always have new educators here and interested, I'll just do a quick, what is Dive for Ag? So in our project, what we're doing is we're working with middle and high school students and serving those students in Oregon and Washington to be able to explore topics in agriculture through immersive experiences, including virtual reality and online activities that we've been doing since the beginning of this project. Today is like the fifth of the PD sessions we have specific for educators to learn about the things that we're creating and how you can use that with the youth that you work with. It's a partnership, again, as I said, between pre-college programs and 4-H Extension at OSU, and we could not do this without our partner outside, and Ida is here today to talk to you, and we'll be talking more details about Time Looper as a partner and the kinds of AI, augmented reality and virtual reality that he's bringing to this project with technology. So we'll get there a little bit later. The idea is that we have a series of PD sessions, and today is the first of 5 very important ones, which are the ones that are gonna not only give you the specific contents in agriculture that we're working with on those apps, but also a sneak peek on the app and what's looking like. And we are getting really close to finishing them and putting in a pilot stage. So you get a sneak peek today about what this app's actually gonna look like. Learn a little bit about the agroecology content through the lenses of our experts working on a project, and kind of think about how would you use this in the classroom with the youth or outside of the classroom, whatever capacity you have as an educator. It is a little bit of partners involved in this project. As I said, pre-college programs, Oregon State Extension Services, 4-H, Oregon Sea Grant, Agriculture in the Classroom, many partners. And Time Looper, who is a technology via AI partner in here, which we'll invite them to kind of demonstrate for the first time. So this is not available to the public yet. You're all going to get a sneak peek of it. And then learn from Gail a little bit about the content behind this app. So let me give them a proper introduction. Our guest speakers today are Ida, who is the CEO of Time Looper, and our partner in the Dive for Ag project is for the VR and AR tools and technology that we're using. And Gail Langelotto is a Dive for Ag agroecology expert at Oregon State. She's an OSU professor in urban and community horticulture and extension, part of a statewide Master Gardener program coordinator. So Gail and Ed have been fantastic partners. The Agroecology app is the first of 5 of starting to kind of reach the pilot stage. And I invited her here today to talk about and share her expertise about agroecology and the concepts and topics that we highlight in the app. And her and Ed are gonna tag team and giving us a sneak peek as well of what you get when you're experiencing this app. So with no further ado, Gail, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Susan, for the opportunity to be part of the Dive for Ag team, as well as for the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the science that is underlying the Agroecology virtual reality app. I also want to thank all of the teachers that are here this evening. Teachers have literally changed my life in ways that I never could have anticipated, and I fully credit my 6th grade science teacher for me being a university professor today. If she didn't tell me that I could do something like this, I never would have believed that I could. So thank you, teachers, and thank you for spending part of your evening to learn a little bit about the science of agroecology. So EAT and his team are extremely smart and able to build these virtual tabletops where students anywhere, people anywhere can explore an agricultural site. the type of agriculture that I was assigned to build out content for is an agroecology site, which is really amenable to a lot of urban ag sites, urban farms of various sizes. And for me, the really exciting thing about urban small-scale farming, which you can see a representation thereof on the right, is that because they're so small, they don't get to take advantage of the efficiencies of scale that more rural, conventional, large-scale farms do with mechanization, large-scale monocultures, which you see a representation there on the left. And one of the wonderful things about having a small-scale urban farm where you interact with the community on a regular basis is that you also have to have biodiversity built into your farm on that first trophic level. So on the level of plant selection, crop selection, you are almost always, if not always, I can't imagine a situation where you wouldn't have a greater diversity of plants on an urban small scale farm than you would on a comparable larger scale farm in a more rural area. And the wonderful thing about that biodiversity on the first trophic level, on the plant level, is that it brings in biodiversity of animals at higher trophic levels. So I'm going to go through 4 of the pins that you can explore and your students can explore on the Agroecology virtual reality app, and just try to give you a sense of some of the science which is underlying the choices that we made within the app. If you have questions at any time, I invite you to unmute and ask them, or to put them into the chat. Maureen and Susan, if you could monitor the chat and let me know if there are any questions that I should address as I'm going through, I'd greatly appreciate it. I will keep myself on task, and I'm aiming to go about 25 minutes. So bear with me for 25 minutes of your evening tonight. So the first pin I'm going to go over is a pin that's entitled Biodiversity is Healthy. So I'm hoping that through this little segment, I can convince you that biodiversity is a wonderful thing and everyone should invite it into their space, whether it's an urban farm or whether you garden. Within your own garden, you can build a biodiverse garden that has health impacts environmentally as well as physically for you as well. And my own personal training is that of an entomologist. I'm a scientist that studies insects, and that's kind of appropriate if we're talking about biodiversity, because scientists estimate that out of all of the life, out of every living thing that we have on Earth, more than half of them are some type of insect. So most scientists agree that about 56% of all life on Earth is some type of insect. Occasionally, oh, sorry for the misspelling there. Occasionally I get into arguments with my friends who study microbes, and they maintain that we just haven't figured out how to count microbes as species yet. And if and when we do, they're going to kick insects out of the lead for biodiversity. But right now, we're still in the lead. So biodiversity is important, and most biodiversity on Earth is some type of insect. Why does that matter? Well, before I tell you why that matters, I think it's kind of interesting to think about, like, how do scientists come up with that number? Did they just pull it out of thin air? And I wanted to give you a peek into some of the ways, one example of a way that scientists have estimated the number of species there are in a particular place and how they scale that up to talk about how many species there are on Earth. And I'm going to focus on insects because, once again, that is my disciplinary bias, but also because insects are so biodiverse. Here we have a picture of Terry Irwin, who estimated that there are 30 million species of insects on Earth. Most other scientists suggest that when we finally get done capturing and counting them all, there are going to be between 2 and 12 million species of insects. So why is Terry Irwin, who really is an esteemed scientist at the Smithsonian Institution, he's probably retired by now, why was he an outlier thinking that there might be as many as 30 million? Well, when Terry Irwin was actively doing research, he was studying biodiversity of insects in Costa Rican rainforests. So I just want to put that into context. He was studying the most biodiverse group of organisms on Earth, the insects. in arguably the most biodiverse place on Earth, the tropical rainforest of Costa Rica. And he did an experiment that we would never be able to do today. This would never pass institutional review at a university. You'll notice that he has these plastic tarps strung underneath of the canopy of the tropical rainforest. Does anyone have a sense what this might be here? I'll let you think about it on your own terms. That's actually a broad spectrum insecticide. So he took a high-powered fogging machine, basically doused the tree canopy with a broad spectrum insecticide, killed whatever was up there, it fell onto the tarps, and he counted and cataloged everything that fell down there. Like I said, he would never be able to do this experiment today. But based upon what he counted, he came up with the overall extreme estimate of 30 million species of insect. When he came back and started presenting his data at scientific conferences, people were like, simmer down, Terry Irwin, you were studying insects in the most biodiverse place on Earth. You didn't take into account temperate regions or Arctic regions. Let's down adjust your estimate. And that's exactly what folks have done. Most entomologists think that 8 to 10 million insects is probably a better estimate of what's truly out there. Why does this biodiversity matter? It matters because we are critically dependent upon insects for just about every part of life that we enjoy. So of course, when many people think about the value that insects bring into their lives, you might think about the food that bees help to pollinate. And agricultural economists are actually able to value how much the pollination services of honeybees and native bees are worth. And it truly is a number that reaches into the billions. If we did not have bees to pollinate our crops, the labor it would take, the technology it would take to enable us to enjoy insect pollinated crops like chocolate and coffee and melons and berries would just be astronomical and out of reach for most farmers. Besides pollination, insects do other services that we may not always think of. Perhaps you have seen these beetles in your life. If you happen to be an insect person, perhaps they are a new species that you've never encountered before. These are what are known as dung beetles. And what a dung beetle does is it finds a patty of cow poo or other animal poo, and then they work together in male-female pairs. It's actually quite romantic to form these little dung balls, and then they work to roll them to a spot where the female and the male will dig together and they will bury the dung ball. The female lays her eggs in that dung ball. And that's actually the food for her larvae when those eggs hatch out. And so it is a rather unique lifestyle. There are actually all of these really cool experiments that talk about male beetles that try to, and I won't even get into it. Suffice to say, there is cheating in the dung beetle world. Males trying to get the benefit of mating without doing the work of putting the labor in to help form and roll the dung ball. You may not think that this is necessarily an economically important endeavor, but it is worth approximately $480 million worth of services for ranchers, and cattle ranchers and farmers who deal with pastured animals, that without the services of dung beetles, you get fouling of your forage so that your animals can no longer eat it. You get the release of nitrogen volatiles into the air, and so a loss of nutrients from your pasture. You also breed parasites and pests that can harm your animals and that can harm you. When dung beetles and other waste managers are not in the picture, it does create a lot of problems for farmers, particularly in pastured areas. Insects are also critically important for pest management services. One of the really great things about having a garden or an urban farm where you have a lot of biodiversity is that in most cases, you may never have to use an insecticide if you are gardening specifically for biodiversity. And that's because gardeners and farmers who garden for biodiversity bring in natural pest control agents like ladybugs. Here we have a ladybug larvae and ladybug eggs, parasitic wasp, and predaceous wasp, who naturally help you to keep pest numbers down without you having to purchase and use pesticides. So for farmers, these insects are estimated to supply about 5.7 billion in pest control services, but that's not even taking into account the negative environmental effects and the negative cost of pesticide usage on environmental integrity. And then perhaps the final service that comes from biodiversity, insect biodiversity in particular, is that insects are critical food for many wildlife species. People thought about like what's the value of insects for small game and for migratory birds that are part of the recreational hunting economy, that are part of sport and commercial fisheries, and that also uphold the bird watching economy. And just as a note, I'm not a bird watcher myself, but it actually kind of floored me away to recognize that this economic valuation of bird watching put the value of bird watching, so the amount of money that bird watchers spend, equivalent to $32.4 billion. And that was like 2007 dollars. I'm not a bird watcher. Perhaps you are. I just want to ask someone who's a bird watcher, like, how much money are you spending that bird watchers pump that much into the economy? Just a fun fact for you, if you do happen to love birds or just casually observe them, most birds are not able to successfully fledge their young from the nest unless they provide their young with a meal of protein. So birds, yes, do eat seeds, they do eat berries, but they can't successfully get their young to leave the nest, fledge from the nest so that they fly and don't die when they fly away, unless they give them a protein meal in the form usually of some type of caterpillar. So a lot of people have estimated what the loss of biodiversity might mean for pollination services, waste management services, pest control services, and even for other wildlife that are dependent upon insects and diverse biota in order to complete their life cycle. So just getting back to this, reminding you that biodiversity is very important, and the fact that insects are more than half of all life on Earth. Hopefully I've convinced you, even if you are not someone who particularly cares for insects, that they do have an important place in our environment and our economy. That if something were to happen to insects, or something were to happen to biodiversity in general, it could have reticulating negative effects on our ecosystems and the services that they provide to us. I just like this little quote from E.O. Wilson, who, if there is such a thing as a famous entomologist, he was the most famous entomologist. He just passed away a couple weeks ago, week and a half ago. In his essay called "The Little Things That Run the World," he wrote, "The truth is we don't need invertebrates such as insects." Oh, sorry. The truth is we need invertebrates such as insects, but they don't need us. If human beings were to disappear tomorrow, the world would go on with little change. And actually the next sentence was like, in fact, the world may actually start to heal itself. But if invertebrates were to disappear from this earth, the earth would be irretrievably changed. And so that's why it's concerning that starting around 2016, 2017, we started to see all of these popular news press stories about the insect apocalypse, based largely upon a set of studies that were conducted in Germany, and then another analysis of the literature to date. People were starting to document that the abundance, the richness, the taxonomic richness, as well as the biomass of insects was precipitously plummeting to 80% to 40% of previous and historic levels. So here's the New York Times feature, the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Insect Armageddon, 5 crucial questions answered. Plummeting insect numbers, threatened collapse of nature. So like as an entomologist, this was something that wasn't a big surprise. And it was kind of like, our moment is here. Maybe people will actually listen to entomologists. Munich study confirms severe decline in insect populations in Germany. So all of these were really concerning. And it likens back to this hypothesis that has been long proposed in the ecological sciences called the Rivet Hypothesis. And that is the idea that biodiversity acts just like rivets on a plane. And so this is another pin that you can pull up on the Agroecology virtual reality app. The Rivet Hypothesis purports that just like rivets on an airplane, each individual species plays an important role in the function of the ecosystem. So each rivet plays an important role in the function of the plane. You can start popping one rivet off of a plane and it'll probably fly okay. You can pop off 2, 3, it'll probably fly okay. But at some point, you're going to pop off one too many rivets on that plane and that plane will no longer function as it should. It will crash. And so scientists suggest that species loss acts much the same way, that ecosystems can tolerate the loss of some species, but at some point the loss of too many species is going to critically damage ecosystem function. And so once again, I want to return this to urban farms, agroecological spaces, even your own home garden if you have a home garden, that what you do in your own small space matters. If you do happen to have a home with a yard, perhaps that yard isn't very big. The average size of a yard in the US today is about 0.12 acres. It's significantly shrunk over the last several years. Homes are getting bigger, yards are getting smaller. But collectively, the amount of land that gardeners and homeowners manage can be quite big. So yards and gardens represent only 2% of total US land area, but it represents as much as 25 to 30% of urban land area and more than 50% of urban green space in the United States. So on this particular slide, I have a map of Chicago, and each little green dot is a residential garden, and each little red dot is a community garden. And the people that mapped the public and private gardens across Chicago counted almost 4,500 individual gardens, which collectively added up to 51 acres. Someone has done something similar for Portland, Oregon. They count about 3,000 gardens, which collectively add up to about 20 acres. And Madison, Wisconsin, someone counted 15,000 gardens, which collectively add up to 120 acres. So even though each individual plot in these urban and suburban spaces can be quite small, collectively they can be quite large. And how you decide to plant them, you know, one of the things I love about Portland is that people will put like a garden just about anywhere they can, whether it's a patio. Here is a rooftop garden on a restaurant where they grow their own food up there. And you can see once again, small spaces, quite diverse. And I want to impress upon you that the diversity of plants is going to bring in a diversity of animals at higher trophic levels. And when I talk about trophic levels, that's just food web, food chain language. Plants are the first trophic level, herbivores are the second trophic level, predators are the third trophic level. Just a couple of examples of more urban gardens, more urban farms. Whether or not an urban space is a garden or farm oftentimes depends upon whether they're actively selling produce that they produce from that space. I just want to impress upon you some really innovative methods that folks use. Here's an urban farm where they have tomatoes and vining crops, squashes. I think this one's particular is squashes. They built a plastic frame around the bottom, and this is on the east side, and so it gets really cold at night. They have a trellis so that every night they can drop the squash into the protection of that plastic so they won't suffer from a freeze. Same thing, plastic being used here. And yes, I know plastic has environmental issues in and of itself. The red plastic here is being used to reflect light and absorb light in ways which promotes earlier ripening of tomatoes, which means that this grower can get their tomatoes to market faster, which means that they can sell them at a premium price. Getting near the end here, I think this is the fourth pin. If you plant it, they will come. Hopefully I've convinced you that small spaces can be diverse, and in this next couple of slides, I want to convince you that even in a small space, you can make a positive difference for biodiversity. This particular study that I cite here, Lowenstein et al., Humans, Bees, and Pollination Services in the City, the case of Chicago, Illinois. When I read what they did and what they found in the study, I literally started jumping up and down in my office and running through the hallways, like trying to get people to recognize my joy. So what they did is they created what they called a mobile garden. And the mobile garden was actually the red pickup truck of my first PhD student, Kevin Madison, that they filled with pollinator attracting plants. They also included plants in there which were dependent upon pollination to set fruit. They drove these mobile pollinator gardens across different neighborhoods in Chicago, parked them for 30 minutes, counted the number of bees that came and visited the plants in the back of the truck. They then took the eggplant, the tomato, and the squash back to the lab and saw how well they were pollinated after being parked in these different neighborhoods in Chicago. And what they found to me was really life-changing. They found that bee abundance, bee richness, which is the number of species, as well as pollination services, were the highest in the most densely populated neighborhoods of Chicago. And to my knowledge, that's the first time that human beings have ever been shown to have a positive impact on ecosystem services. Usually we are associated with the destruction of ecosystem services. And the mechanism that they proposed for that positive relationship really had to do with biodiversity at the first trophic level, at the plant level. Where you have more people, you have more gardens. Where you have more gardens, you have a bigger diversity of flowering plants. And where you have a bigger diversity of flowering plants, you're going to bring in biodiversity at higher trophic levels. These are just a couple of pictures of some of my previous research sites when I was at Fordham University in the Bronx. We studied bees in urban gardens there. This is literally right outside of this site right here in East Harlem. So just going from like here and stepping outside the garden, you can see like the really stark contrast between plants and urban. And this site right here was Fordham Garden in the South Bronx, just showing you that even in the most urban of spaces, you can have these really rich oases of plants and the animals that they bring. I'm going to end with hopefully a little bit of inspiration that you too can make a difference in your own garden. Excuse me, my nose is just a little bit runny. For 3 years, I studied the bees in the gardens of Portland, the Portland metro region of Portland, Oregon. The pins over here are where all of our study sites were. I did have another site down in Woodburn, but it got cut because just the traffic through Woodburn, I couldn't take it anymore. So anyway, site 51 was our second smallest site. It was one of these two gardens right here. I can't remember which one off the top of my head. It was our second smallest site, and it was absolutely one of our most urban. I've kind of anonymized the garden location here, but you can see Killingsworth Avenue, Interstate Avenue, where the Max line is, I-5 just a few blocks away. On 3 sides of this garden were high-rise apartment buildings and motels. but the person who managed this garden really wanted to garden for biodiversity, and every plant that they selected was chosen because it was known to have a positive impact on biodiversity. So big leaf maple in a small urban lot, borage, hyssop, every plant selection was carefully made. And in this 0.1 acre lot, he had our second highest bee species richness, 27 different species. To give you a sense of what our number one site was, our number one site was 40 times larger than this urban lot. And so he was really nearly on par with the site that was 40 times larger. I do like to end with that just because it does show, even if you have a small space, deliberate choices, building in biodiversity at the ground level will make a difference for other organisms. And urban farms and the agroecological concepts that they employ are really fantastic spaces to demonstrate and take advantage of some of the concepts I've talked about, because a small space necessitates that you be thoughtful about plant choice. You can't just do monoculture. You're not going to be able to sell like tomatoes and only tomatoes. Your customer is going to want more than that if you're working in urban spaces. So I think that was all I had for the science part.
Awesome. Thank you, Gail. This is so inspiring. I seen a note from Monica down on the chat saying super inspiring for individuals to be able to make a real difference. So lots of thanks to you for running us through the background science of and choices that the team made to put it into the app itself. We're gonna let it join in quick because he has to leave by 6. So if he comes in and kind of tag team with you, Gail, on a kind of a sneak peek and talking through, we can keep this very conversational as folks can jump in. Feel free to ask questions that put on the chat afterwards. But we wanted to then transition into thinking about here's why this is the so what, right? This, I think the core message that Gail kind of gave us here with the topic and content is like, what the so what? Why are we doing this? Why this topic for youth and educators is where we're coming from. And Gail has been an invaluable partner to help harness this message for youth and educators in this app and bringing the so what to it. So she gave us this overarching umbrella of the science between a kind of a sneak peek of content into the pins. And maybe now it's time for it to come in and kind of show you how does this actually look like on the app, and kind of give you a little short sneak peek tour before we open up the floor for questions that we can all be answering, and kind of seeing what you think and what ways you can use something like that with the youth that you work with. So, welcome.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Gail. So as Time put, we work with educational institutions to help them, enable them to tell complicated stories in a more engaging way. We use virtual reality and augmented reality as a tool. And I'm sure you heard of AR, VR, augmented reality, virtual reality. And then the first thing comes to your mind is a virtual reality headset. That's one of the devices that you can consume VR, AR content. Another one is your mobile device, whether it's an Android phone, iPhone, or tablets. Another one also on your browsers. The level of immersion changes. Of course, with the headset, it's the most immersive, but this is also doable on mobile devices. Now we are going to, with Gail, we're going to give you a sneak peek of the app. And then as we are doing it, I'm going to explain which part is VR and which part is AR. And then also I'm going to talk to you about and show you how, while I'm sharing my screen, I'll be sharing this my phone screen. I'm going to show you how mechanically it works. Once we do that, after that, also we're going to talk about, okay, this is a great way of to consume this content. what if the students could create their own projects in this format? How easy it is. So we're going to talk about that very briefly. And then with that, first of all, the difference between AR and VR. Augmented reality is placing a digital object in your environment. Imagine that I'm in New York. Wouldn't it be great? A hologram of Susan appears in my living room, and then I can have a conversation with Susan. Susan is in Oregon, I'm in New York, but as a digital avatar, she can appear here. Virtual reality is putting a 360-degree content around you. So wouldn't it be great if I could go to Oregon and then visit Susan in her apartment, in her house. So now it's blocking all of my view and taking me to a place or a time that I cannot visit. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. And again, the purpose of this tool is to engage students, engage the consumers, making them from passive consumers to active participants. So now I'm on my phone and the mobile app is open. Now I'm going to share my screen. All right, so this is the mobile app. It's called Explore. There are multiple institutions they're using the same app to tell their stories, from civil rights to world history. Now we scroll down. These are going to be publicly available soon. So we scroll down. All right. So there'll be 5 projects when we finish. And the first one is ready. The other ones are still in work in progress. So now what I'm going to do is I click here. There's going to be more information about this project, this specific project here. And when I click View in AR, I scan my table, desk, sorting, and it's right here. I'm rotating it, adjusting it, start export. So you can see I'm more in front of my laptop. My laptop is real, but this is digital. And this is augmented reality. And I can look around it from every direction. I'm just moving my phone. Let me rotate my camera so that you can also see me what I'm doing. So as you can see, there's nothing on my desk, but through my phone, I can see this 3D model. And just by moving my phone, I can get really close and look at everything. So this allows a new degree of freedom to the users to engage with the content. So yeah, so what we are looking at is augmented reality. So where am I going next? Okay.
So why don't you follow the pins that I highlighted and start with Biodiversity Is Healthy.
All right, so Biodiversity Healthy pin is here. What I'm doing is I'm getting very close with my phone and then tapping on it. And now what we are looking at is a virtual reality content. It's 360. So this is VR. And there are additional pins. When I click,
there are a lot of things that farmers do to
there's
maintain
a voice
high
file
biodiversity.
explaining.
Bees pollinate crops to create fruit and seeds.
When I pause, there are more pins around me, and then by clicking them, I can get more information. So there's another one here.
Ladybugs are predators that eat aphids and other pests.
Gail, is there anything that you would like to highlight? You want me to turn and look at, open?
Maybe just try one more pin. I haven't seen them all, and these are the teens as teachers.
Honeybees are managed pollinators. Hives can be moved in and out of fields to pollinate crops.
The teens as teachers narrated it, so I haven't seen the final picture. It looks so great, Thank you.
Now I'm clicking back and going back to the model.
So then the second one I went over in my presentation was just like rivets on a plane.
All right, so here's the pin pointing the plane, and I'm getting close to it, tapping it. And now there's the 3D plane. Should I click on the hologram, Gail?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
I'm going here, clicking the hologram.
High biodiversity helps farms stay healthy and productive for longer because of the different species. A species' role is easily replaced by another that can fill the gap. Just like a plane needs rivets to hold it together, when you remove too many rivets, pieces fall off and the plane cannot fly smoothly. This is similar to how we need many species to keep agricultural ecosystems healthy and productive. When species get removed, they cannot be replaced. It causes the effects of biodiversity to fade. This leads to an ecosystem failing. For example, these high biodiversity garden spaces are filled with plants that could attract different animals, birds, and insects. Compared to these garden spaces, they have fewer variety of plants and are mostly filled with grass. The low biodiversity cannot support as many helpful animals and insects.
So this is good to highlight, if I can jump in for a couple of seconds, that it is our master of technology. Gail is our master of everything in this agroecology team with our youth experts. And they did an amazing job working with the youth to create content for this. So the hologram you saw is one of our Teens as Teachers participants. Some of the scripts, videos, materials that we created were all their voices and collected with them and produced with them, which is a very powerful experience for them. And it was one goal of this. We wanted to have some of the experience having youth talking to youth, and they could see their peers and their voices in the content. So I'm so excited to see the first pilot of it going in, and even more excited to see this being released later on in a few months. So. Gail, can you talk a little bit about about the approach for the tabletop, because that's a real location, right?
Yes, yeah. So the tabletop kind of architecture was based upon the Oak Creek Center for Urban Horticulture on the Oregon State University campus, and Oak Creek captured some of what we wanted to communicate about agroecology, but not everything. And so EAT took what was filmed at Oak Creek, and then we had several iterative conversations about what else we wanted to see. So if you're familiar with the Oregon State campus, you know that those high-rise buildings are not on 35th Street. Those were completely added in by EAT. He also highlighted, of course, there wasn't a plane flying over crop dusting Oak Creek. So he added that, and the large bee, and the hummingbird. And so it was, I think, an iterative process about the ideas that we had, and EAT making them come alive through technological magic that I can't even pretend to understand. So there were two more pins. I don't know if you have time for both of them or just one. Why don't we go to the even small spaces can be diverse pin?
Every decision has an impact, which drives us to make the best ones. This could not be more true with agriculture. Farmers and gardeners have to make decisions to cultivate a good supply of crops and maintain their ecosystem.
Thank you. And then the final pin was that if you plant it, they will come.
In your own garden, you have the opportunity to grow diverse foods
This is a
and to plant diverse
360-degree
crops.
video.
This will help you to bring more biodiversity to your garden, including birds, bees,
I'm
and
moving
other
around
beneficial
and looking around.
organisms. If you plant it, they will come.
Gail, that was the last pin, but can I open the bee too? That's my favorite.
Oh my God, that'd be so adorable. Please do.
Be inviting.
And the pin.
Those were honeybee hives at Oak Creek that children had painted. And the bee is morphologically correct. It was very important to me that the bee be morphologically correct. So I had many obnoxious and kind of, pedantic type edits that Eat was very accommodating with. So thank you.
This is great. And
you.
then it's like there will be some audio. So there is quite a few. So the prototype of this table, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of ready. We're still kind of doing final touches, adding some audio and other things in the content of the pins. But you kind of get the idea of what these experiences is gonna be about for those using it. And maybe it'll be okay. I would love to hear from you and your experience working in a different kind of project. I know you're used to building big field trips for national parks and state parks where, it's not at the scale of what we're doing. So I know it's a little bit of a push boundaries for you to think about this creatively. We're not doing a typical virtual field trip, but we want to be creative about the level of immersion that the youth is having here. So can you share a little bit about that and how you came up with that creative concept?
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from Turkey. This idea of time loopers started a long time ago. In Turkey, the history goes back 10,000 years. When I go to all these historic places, I always imagine what would it be like standing here back in the old days. Then we started working with the cultural institutions from all around the world, from Pearl Harbor to Hiroshima to Pompeii. Then COVID hit. And in all these places, locked down. And then they reach out to us and say, like, how can we give virtual tours? Can I take a 360 picture from my, inside my museum, from my site? But it really doesn't make sense. Why am I only looking at a 360 picture? How can we provide more context? And at that time, we came up with this Explore platform idea. Actually, it was the time when I was locked on. That was the first week of lockdown. I was with my kids, and we were looking at the National Mall map, which we also work with National Mall in Washington, D.C. with the National Park Service. And we were going from memorial to memorial, and then activating the content that we created for them. But it's a paper map. And then we were having conversations about civil rights movements, about the Declaration of Independence. Then I said, wouldn't it be great if just like this map was also in front of me and I could explore? And then we started that way. Now we are working with parks all around the world, and then this is an educational tool. So to provide more engaging content for the students. When you look at the content inside the pin, those are like sometimes pictures, sometimes videos, sometimes 360 pictures. So easy to create, but looking at them in this format is highly immersive and engaging. Even the hologram is actually, at the end of the day, it's a video file that we turn and make it look cool and interesting. This started as a tool during COVID, but now it's a permanent tool for all these institutions to engage with their visitors. And then they are even using this for on-site experiences as well. When you go to a state park, you see yourself on the map, and then you are welcomed with a sometimes a reenactor, a Civil War reenactor, sometimes a civil rights movement leader. But if you go to Japan, you are guided by Hiroshima atomic bomb survivors. We interviewed them, we created their holograms. So but the essence is always saying, how can we make this more engaging and interesting for students so that they start caring about these topics and then hopefully they take actions in the future.
Great. So maybe it's time to open up for a few questions and comments if you want to talk to us, Gail, and a little more. I will tell you, Monica made a comment about the goggles and cheap ones to use with the iPhones. Just so you know, these will be released and could be downloadable in the app for free by anyone and be used that way. In fact, we're gonna be working with educators to, when they're like doing virtual classes, how they can have a guest and come in and use this in that way. But we're also, at least if you're in Oregon or Washington, we have budget to put lots of VR kits together for borrowable kits with the actual goggles there. So if we were having this PD session now in person, you would be all wearing the VR goggles and going to this kind of experiences. So hope we're getting there. So there'll be these multiple ways that folks can access those apps. And as part of the continued work between now and the release of the apps to the public, we're also going to be producing lessons and lesson plans and things that will go with it that will be supportive of educators to implement it. Now, Prakash, I think Susan is raising a hand.
Hello, yes, thank you for both of your presentations. They were really informative and also really, a lot of cutting edge ideas there. I'm just admiring it as I review it in my head again. One question that popped up was, is there already a technology for live holograms available? Do you or someone is someone working on that? And then I'm also wondering, is there any work being done with regards to kind of invertebrate species or insect species in other areas, more like riparian areas rather than at-home gardens? So just random riparian areas in the urban city, if there's any work being done in those two areas, two regards, sorry.
I can take the first one, live holograms. Yes, live holograms are possible. But in order to have live programs, then first of all, you need to have a very the high-speed internet. We are doing that in Japan and South Korea. That high-speed internet is not available everywhere in the US, so that we have not launched it. But part of live hologram is having a conversation with that person. How does that person can see you? And then there are different ways of doing the same thing in a tune go. Which is probably you heard about metaverse. It's a very famous word right now. So what we are doing right now for the US market and also for the other markets, you can join this session, what I was showing you, with your avatar. You have an avatar and then join, and then you are giving a tour. You are hearing each other. You are having a conversation. And then still you can do it with your Chromebook at school, someone else with a smartphone, or someone with a virtual reality headset. So again, it's not dependent on the hardware. It works with all these platforms. The idea is how can we make it more participant and active? And then metaverse is in development right now. And then we are working in touch with the publication companies. They also want to create their content in this format and then share with the schools. And it is not a live program, but it's a live session done with avatars.
Okay, great. And in that regard, what I'm thinking about is, with the avatars, it's person to person. So you see one person and you see other person, but what you were showing was really beautiful, the landscape. So I'm wondering if kind of like are you positioning cameras or other things for it to not just be an avatar, but being able to walk through the space while you're not actually there?
So within the same, so the 3D model that we have can also work in metaverse, where you and we can join, everybody in this room can join at the same time, and we'll be looking at that model all through our own devices rather than me sharing on Zoom. And then when I hold my phone up, you see my avatar, I see your avatar, I hear you, I see you. So it's kind of like those video games, but this video game is taking place in this 3D model on the map. And then we are walking around pointing different things. And then also this 3D top model is custom made, like the bees. And then even though we did lots of modifications to so that we can talk about different education content. But there's other ways of doing this. We have a tool which we didn't touch. And then Susan, if we have time, I can show that. Students can create their own projects. It's super easy. You go to Google Maps, you choose an area, drop a pin, take a picture, upload that picture, and then it's in the app the next second. It's that easy. So this is where we are going with this product is from an educators creating this highly engaging content, then allowing students to create their own projects in this format after learning from that topic. And then when they're presenting their projects, rather than doing it over me like screen sharing, all the kids and then students are joining in the same metaverse environment and then walking around and then talking. So we're moving from boards to really moving inside these environments. And then this is not science fiction, it's like it's here. And you need a phone or a Chromebook.
Thank you so much. It's great.
And Susan, to address your question about riparian areas, my colleague, Sandy DeBano in Eastern Oregon, she does a lot of work looking at plant selection for riparian restoration and effects on insects. A lot of the areas she studies are rural and not urban, but the plant choices that she's found to be really good for riparian restoration, stream shading, are also really good for insects as well as for birds and I was going to say ungulates, but you're not going to get a lot of ungulates hopefully going through the urban center. In urban areas in particular, Susan Masta, who is an independent ecologist, she does a lot of studies on dragonflies and pond and stream restoration for urban areas. So there is work being done in those areas, not by me, but by colleagues I have great respect for.
Thank you. And one question that I recall from earlier, sorry, I just really love both of your topics. I was wondering, you mentioned the mobile garden. What methods were your students actually using to determine the diversity of that? Like, did they put cameras, or are they watching it all? How do they determine that?
Yeah, they literally drove this pickup truck around to different neighborhoods in Chicago, parked it for half an hour, and then they had students on each side observing and counting and identifying the insects that would come and visit the back of the plants in the back of the pickup truck.
Oh, okay.
They did it repeatedly throughout the summer at the same sites, and they would randomize order of visitation so that there wouldn't be a bias towards early versus late parking in a particular neighborhood.
That's great. Thank you so much. Sorry to bombard you both with questions. It was just like...
That's what we're here for. Thank you, Susan. I saw that Ashley Joyce had a question on the comment that I think it may have been addressed a little bit, but share about what kinds of ideas do you have for students to add pins to the platform? I think you all can share a little bit of the experience of choosing the pins on the platform, but I think the idea, once we're done with this project, Ashley, is kind of really explore this new explore platform that it kind of started to talk about, and maybe we can demonstrate a little bit later. That is, then you go to this experience with the youth, you do our apps, right? You visit, you do the whole experience, you do lessons. Now what? Well, maybe there's a school garden, something that you were working on, and we can then take the next step, so the students are no longer just receiving this content, but they becoming active producers, so they can go from their learning that they did with this to go look at their garden in the backyard or the school garden or whatever gets identified, and they can create their own pins. So if I can dream enough, I could say I could back to Brazil and go visit urban garden in Brazil and say I learned all of this from Gail, and dive for egg about agroecology in Oregon. As urban sites in Oregon, the urban sites in Brazil, it looks just like this. So I can take a photo, I can record something, I can do a recipe and put a pin and add to this growing portfolio of agroecology content for to say, right? You can jump right on that. And Ashley, you can let me know if I misinterpreted your question.
No, that's what I was asking, but then another question just came to me in terms of making sure that that content is research based and accurate. Is there like a system for getting it like approved onto the platform? How do you manage all of that?
Right. You are muted.
Right. So we are looking at the creator tool on the platform. In order to be live being on the homepage, you need to be a cultural institution. Individually, you cannot randomly post it. But anyone can create content, but those content is private. Like students can create content, but only you as the teacher, and then students can have access to it. Very quickly. So I'm in New York. I click this, and then this becomes the map that appears. Zoom a little bit. I'm in downtown New York. Let's go to that area. Further. This is what we're looking at, is Google Maps. I'm just moving the box around to choose my neighborhood. You can also have a satellite view of it. Map version. And then next thing is you go and then stop dropping pins. You can drop as many pins as you want to tell your story. My house is somewhere here. And then you can name this pin as something. Then you go and assign content. So this, I took a picture of this and gave, I'm sorry, this is plastic, it's not real, but I'm going to use it as an example. Here, upload content. Then I go to my computer, browse. There's the picture. I'm uploading it. I can add an audio file, save, and go here, project name, and can enter all the other information here and click save. Now I'm going to stop sharing here, and then now share my mobile phone screen. So here you see it's home. Let me move this a little bit. And then after, when I log in, this is my Explore. So home, these are all the created by educators. And then my Explore here is my own personal projects that you cannot see. And then here's the plant that I just created. And I select that one, click View in AR, scan, and here's the Tribeca map. And then here's the pin, because that's the real plant, just fake. I select this one, and then the picture appears, the one that I took. So it is that simple for students to create content. But to your question, this private content can only be seen by me and with the people that I share, like my teacher. It's not available for public.
So that is a great question, Ashley, because, for this project, Dive for Ag, we brought in the experts, right? We're bringing in the science and the evidence base and making sure the bee looks like it should look like. All right. But using that with the youth in the classrooms, I think about the goals, right? For using something like that, it can be different goals. So I can see this is actually a pretty cool new tool platform that youth can be building their skills on presentation, right? And presenting in a different alternative format that's not a PowerPoint or something like that. That it's not necessarily about the experience of the youth creating and doing things and not necessarily the outcomes of the products. Or you could have a more focused project if you continue with this, that it's really more focused on other goals that will look different. But I can't see a number of applicabilities for this, but it does beg the question, going down the line, when we have, what if you want to continue to talk about agroecology and the students and educators go on in their own little projects in their garden? What do we do then to add that experience or put that in, not necessarily in our tabletop, but making that visible part of the learning process for everyone as a result of this project? You know what I mean?
There is, when we are working with there are review processes. Mm-hmm. So an Oregon State University, let's say in this instance, can be the reviewer and project approver as the experts, as we are kind of doing right now. And students can submit their projects, and then experts can review the content and then provide feedback, like in Google Docs, how you can leave comments for the students, you can leave comments and then send it back. And when it's finalized, it can be published here. So we have all those reviewing tools that can be used for this purpose.
It's such a great way to connect people who are in so many different places to, this is obviously obvious to all of us, but, to a phenomenon that's everywhere on Earth, and to just see that in all these different locales and the difference that it's really making, to actually see them and to hear stories. And
Right. We're even tweaking now. We normally, in one of our programs at OSU, we do a big challenge event with high schoolers as a result of a whole year of interactions, part of our SMILE program. From some of you who know SMILE, the after school clubs with students work on content, evidence-based content all year long and learning, and then they come in and commit into a challenge, which is going to be virtual this year for the second time in a row, because I can't bring it 400 youth from all over Oregon into campus right now, right? So we're tweaking with the idea of this metaverse, and how can we give them an opportunity of, still being together, even if it's as avatars, and doing a challenge in some sort of different format. And of course, that's conversation for us later, in all of the diving into the world of youth safety and cyberspace and all of that, and what does it all mean as far as protective layers that can go in there. But this is one of the ways that it's flourished out of this project. Well, we're doing all of this with Time Looper and Dive for Ag. Would we be able to do a challenge where the students come in and they are still joining in virtual space as avatars? So it may or may not happen, but it's something in exploration right now. But it's one of the unexpected outcomes of this project, is that in this huge youth co-creation piece has always been so impactful to us, that we're running another cohort right now with another 14 youth for another one of the 5 apps as well, for creating content. So it's pretty, as I learn, the sky and the limit, and we're trying to tiptoe our tools into things that are bringing some more level of immersion to visual programming that we can, because right now, I don't see the end of it. Even if we go back to some sort of normal that we can do back to in person, I think there's always going to be an element of virtual programming staying. We've learned good beneficial things about it. I mean, there are audiences that we reach in some of our programs that would never be able to have before. There's also many problems with accessibility and all of that. So, but it's right now that we're exploring what are the kinds of things that are really engaging for the youth that they're going to engage with, and for the educators that we can keep as part of our programming. Right. It's 5:57. I don't see any other questions or hands raised, but you know where to find us. I know Eat has to go, and so is Gail. So I wanted to thank them for coming and joining us and talking to you about this amazing journey they've been in putting this together. We're very thankful for that, and hope to see you getting pilots and some response to them on the final product. And again, I reiterate Gail's words that we really appreciate that you are here. It is a tough time. It's resiliency is wearing out. Fatigue, COVID fatigue is really real. So we're dealing with all of our programs and pre-college programs this month. We're turning to virtual, and everyone pivots, and we're all doing the best we can. So I appreciate you making the time and being interested in engaging, learning about these products and how you can possibly use them when they are free and available.